Now he's saying, I don't believe in marriage. Maybe I should move back home.
Imagine spending 8 years proving that your relationship is worth every argument, every sacrifice, every uncomfortable family confrontation, and every moment when walking away would have been easier, only to discover that when the pressure becomes unbearable, the person you fought beside might still hesitate to choose you. That is exactly where Jenny finds herself, because Sumit's family has finally drawn a line that cannot be negotiated around anymore. He can return to them and rebuild the support he has lost, or he can continue his life with Jenny, knowing that the family safety net may disappear completely. The shocking part is not the ultimatum itself, because Jenny has lived with family resistance for years. The shocking part is that Sumit does not immediately reject it, and the moment Jenny realizes he is actually considering going back, the entire marriage suddenly feels less secure than she believed it was. Jenny's reaction is not the explosive argument Sumit might have expected, because at first she simply watches him trying to explain why the situation is complicated, and the calmer she becomes, the more uncomfortable the conversation gets. She tells him that returning to his family is his decision, but she also makes one thing painfully clear. She will not be moving back with him, and if he chooses to leave their home and return to the same environment that has repeatedly put pressure on their relationship, she has to start asking herself why she should remain in India, waiting for another uncertain chapter. Sumit immediately tries to separate those two decisions, because in his mind, going home does not automatically mean leaving Jenny. But Jenny sees the situation differently. After everything they have survived, she cannot understand how the same pressure can still control what happens next. And before Sumit can reassure her, another problem quietly enters the conversation. Because this decision is not only about love anymore. Money has started changing the meaning of every option Sumit has, and that is where this situation becomes much more complicated than a simple family versus wife argument. Sumit has financial obligations and loans that have become increasingly difficult to manage, and while Jenny originally believed those problems could be handled with time, she slowly begins to understand how much his family's support has mattered whenever things became unstable. Suddenly, when Sumit talks about returning home, Jenny cannot tell whether he wants emotional reconciliation or whether he is terrified of facing financial pressure without anyone behind him. That distinction matters, because if Sumit were simply missing his family, Jenny could understand the emotional conflict even if she hated the decision. But if money is pushing him back into a situation that threatens their marriage, then the problem becomes much more frightening, because money does not disappear after one emotional conversation. To understand why this hits Jenny so hard, you have to rewind slightly to the confrontation that created this situation. Because Sumit's family is no longer presenting their position as an open discussion. They have reached a point where they believe they cannot continue supporting him while also watching him build a life they never fully accepted. So their message becomes brutally simple. If Sumit wants the family structure, the emotional connection, and the practical support that comes with it, then he needs to come back and repair those relationships on their terms. Sumit hears that and immediately feels pulled in two directions, because despite everything that has happened, he has never stopped wanting acceptance from his family, and that desire has always existed beside his love for Jenny. For years, he has tried to keep both relationships alive, but now he is being told that keeping both may no longer be possible. That is also where Sumit's biggest struggle starts looking very different, because maybe his real challenge was never choosing Jenny once during one dramatic moment. Maybe the real test has always been whether he can continue choosing the marriage every single time the consequences of that choice return. Choosing somebody when you are angry, emotional, and determined to prove everyone wrong is difficult, but continuing to make that same choice years later, when bills are due, family relationships are damaged, your future feels uncertain, and the excitement of fighting for love has been replaced by ordinary responsibility, is something completely different. Jenny understands that difference immediately, because she has already heard Sumit say that he chose her, and from her perspective, that question should have been settled years ago. What frightens her now is discovering that the answer might become negotiable every time life gets harder. Sumit, however, does not believe he is renegotiating the marriage. And this is where the two of them begin having completely different conversations while sitting in the same room. When Sumit says, "I need my family," Jenny hears, "My family still has enough power to determine what happens to us." When he says, "I need to fix things," she hears, "Our marriage might have to move aside," while I make everyone else comfortable again. And when he explains that returning home could only be temporary, Jenny does not hear reassurance, because temporary arrangements have a dangerous way of becoming permanent when nobody knows what has to happen before they end. Sumit thinks he is asking Jenny to understand a difficult situation, while Jenny feels like she is being asked to trust another promise without knowing what that promise is actually worth. The financial problem makes that uncertainty even worse, because once Jenny starts asking practical questions, Sumit cannot answer them with the same confidence he uses when talking about love. If they stay together in their current situation, how quickly can he reduce the debt? If family support disappears completely, what expenses become harder to manage? If something unexpected happens, who helps them then? Sumit does not have a magical solution, and Jenny is not expecting one, but she does expect him to have a direction. Instead, every answer seems to create another question, and that is when Jenny begins realizing that his family's ultimatum has arrived at the worst possible moment, because emotional independence is much easier to promise when you are financially comfortable than when you are staring at obligations you are not sure how to handle alone. From Sumit's perspective, going home begins to look like a way to create breathing room rather than a betrayal. And this is important because he is not sitting there thinking, I want to leave Jenny. In his mind, he can return temporarily, rebuild communication with his family, reduce some immediate pressure, get his finances under control, and eventually create a better situation for everyone. That sounds reasonable when he explains it slowly, but there is one enormous problem with the plan. It assumes Jenny will remain exactly where she is emotionally while he figures everything out. Sumit is treating time like a resource they still have plenty of, while Jenny has started treating time like the most expensive thing she has already spent. And neither of them understands yet how dangerous that difference is about to become. Jenny begins looking back at the years behind them, not because she wants to list every sacrifice she has made, but because she needs to understand whether the relationship has actually moved forward. She has accepted uncertainty before, she has waited for circumstances to improve before, and she has believed that the next major decision would finally give them stability before. Every time something changed, there was another reason why complete independence had to come later, and Jenny tolerated that because she believed they were moving toward a shared future. Now, instead of feeling closer to that future, she is hearing that Sumit may return to the very family structure they spent years trying to separate their marriage from. And the more she thinks about it, the less this feels like one temporary setback, and the more it feels like they have somehow circled back to the beginning. What makes the situation especially painful is that Jenny does not actually want Sumit to stop loving his family. And that is the part Sumit struggles to hear when emotions rise. She understands that family relationships matter deeply to him, and she knows that asking him to simply stop caring would never solve anything. But she believes there is a massive difference between loving your family and allowing your family's approval to control the stability of your marriage. Sumit keeps defending his feelings for them, while Jenny keeps trying to explain that his feelings are not the issue. The issue is whether they can build a marriage that still functions when his family is unhappy with his choices. Because if the relationship can only feel secure when everybody outside it is satisfied, then Jenny knows they may never have the independent life she thought they were creating. And just when the argument seems like it cannot become more complicated, Jenny introduces the possibility Sumit has been avoiding: America. Until this point, returning to America has existed somewhere in the background as one possible future direction, but Jenny has never wanted it to become an emergency escape plan from another crisis. Now she begins wondering whether staying in India indefinitely still makes sense if Sumit is moving back toward his family instead of building forward with her. She does not claim that America will automatically fix everything, and she does not pretend that moving would erase their problems, but she does understand one thing very clearly: if she is going to face uncertainty either way, she would rather choose an uncertainty that gives her some control over her own life than remain trapped inside a situation where everybody else keeps determining the next move. That changes the central question almost instantly, because Jenny is no longer only asking whether Sumit will stay with her. She is asking what staying with him would actually look like if nothing else changes. Would they still be having this same conversation months from now? Would Sumit continue splitting his energy between repairing his family relationship and protecting his marriage? Would every financial problem create another reason to become dependent on people who do not support the life they chose together? And even if Sumit promises he will eventually build a different future, how long is Jenny expected to wait before eventually becomes something real? Those questions hit Sumit much harder than another accusation would, because he can defend himself against anger, but he cannot easily defend a future that still has no clear shape. Jenny then says something that completely changes the mood of the conversation, because she tells Sumit she does not need another promise about what might happen later. She needs to see a decision reflected in what he actually does now. Sumit tries to reassure her that he is not abandoning the marriage, but that answer no longer satisfies her, because from Jenny's perspective, the problem is not whether Sumit loves her. She already believes he loves her, and that might actually make the situation more painful, because love has never been the only thing standing between them and stability. She wants to know whether he can take responsibility for the life they created without retreating whenever pressure becomes overwhelming. And Sumit's hesitation before answering gives Jenny more information than anything he could have said. That hesitation is the moment where the story turns, because Sumit finally admits that he is seriously considering returning to his family home. He immediately adds conditions to make the statement sound less final, explaining that he is not talking about ending the marriage, he is not saying Jenny has to come with him, and he is not promising that the move would be permanent. He presents it as a practical step inside an impossible situation, almost like he is moving pieces around on a board until he can create a better position later. But Jenny is no longer evaluating the decision as a temporary living arrangement, because to her the symbolic meaning is much bigger than the address. If Sumit moves back after his family tells him to choose, then regardless of his intention, their ultimatum has worked. Sumit insists that Jenny is interpreting the decision too emotionally. And that comment only makes things worse, because Jenny believes the entire situation exists precisely because Sumit refuses to see what his actions communicate. If somebody tells you, "Come back to us," or "Continue your life without our support," and you respond by going back, Jenny argues that the message is obvious even if you call the arrangement temporary. Sumit believes he can separate the practical benefit from the emotional meaning, while Jenny believes that is impossible, because every practical benefit comes attached to the same family pressure that has followed their relationship for years. Neither of them is pretending anymore, and for the first time, Sumit begins realizing that what looks like a compromise to him might look like surrender to Jenny. This is where the debt problem stops being background information and becomes personal, because Jenny suddenly understands what financial instability can do to a relationship even when both people still love each other. Money does not have to create one giant dramatic explosion to destroy trust. Sometimes it simply removes options until people start making decisions they once promised they would never make. Sumit may genuinely want an independent marriage with Jenny, but if his financial reality keeps pushing him toward family dependence, Jenny cannot ignore the possibility that good intentions are no longer enough. She sacrificed stability because she believed they were building something together. And now the cruel contradiction is that Sumit may be searching for stability in a place that makes Jenny question whether that something was ever truly independent. Sumit pushes back because he feels Jenny is reducing his family to a source of pressure, when from his perspective, they are also people he loves and people whose absence has hurt him. He explains that losing them has never been easy, even when he believed staying with Jenny was the right choice. And now the combination of debt, uncertainty, and family separation has left him feeling like every direction costs him something important. If he stays exactly where he is, he worries about money and the possibility of losing his family permanently. If he returns home, he worries Jenny will see it as betrayal. And if he refuses to choose anything, both situations continue getting worse. For the first time, you can understand why he feels trapped, but understanding the trap does not automatically make Jenny responsible for remaining inside it with him. Jenny's response becomes noticeably quieter at this point, and that shift affects Sumit more than shouting would have. Earlier, she wanted to challenge every explanation, but now she begins listening without trying to convince him, almost as though she is mentally removing herself from the debate. Sumit notices and asks why she has suddenly stopped arguing, and Jenny tells him that she is tired of having conversations where the same problem returns wearing different clothes. Sometimes it is family acceptance, sometimes it is money, sometimes it is timing, and sometimes it is simply another request for patience. But from her perspective, the result is always the same. She is expected to wait, while Sumit tries to make every part of his life comfortable before their marriage can finally become the priority she thought it already was. That is the moment where Sumit realizes Jenny's Jenny's anger was actually safer for him than her exhaustion, because anger meant she was still fighting for a specific outcome. Exhaustion is different, because exhaustion means a person can start imagining life after the argument instead of trying to win it. Jenny is no longer asking, how do I convince Sumit not to go? She is asking, what do I do if he goes? That may sound like a small shift, but emotionally it changes everything, because the second question does not require Sumit's cooperation. She can answer it alone. And once Jenny understands that, America stops functioning as a dramatic threat she can use to get his attention and begins looking like a practical option she can actually prepare for. Instead of dramatically packing a suitcase in the middle of the night, Jenny begins discussing boring details. And those details terrify Sumit because they make the possibility feel real. She starts thinking about what she would take with her, where she could stay when she first returned, which parts of her life in India she would need to close down, and whether it would even make sense to call the move temporary if nobody knew when Sumit would follow. She wonders whether they would try a period of separation, whether Sumit would eventually join her if his situation improved, or whether distance would simply reveal that they had reached the end without admitting it. Jenny is not celebrating any of these possibilities, but she is finally willing to look directly at them, and Sumit realizes he is no longer the only person deciding what happens next. Sumit immediately tells Jenny that she is moving too fast, because in his mind, he has only said he might return home while she is already discussing leaving the country. Jenny tells him that is exactly the problem. He has spent years asking her to live inside, might, maybe, soon, and later, while expecting her not to prepare for what those words could eventually mean. If Sumit can seriously consider one option because it protects him from financial and family pressure, then Jenny believes she is allowed to seriously consider an option that protects her from another indefinite period of waiting. She is not trying to punish him, and she is not threatening to disappear the next morning. But she refuses to pretend that his choices exist in isolation while hers somehow have to remain frozen. The possibility of America now exposes another uncomfortable weakness in their future, because even if Sumit decides to stay with Jenny, they still need an actual plan for what independence looks like. Jenny worries that family conflict, financial strain, and constant uncertainty could slowly destroy their ability to pursue any future together, whether that future eventually involves America or simply a more stable life where they are. She does not make legal predictions or claim she knows exactly what options they would have, but she knows that unstable situations rarely become easier when people keep postponing the decisions that created them. Sumit begins realizing that choosing Jenny emotionally is only one part of the problem. If he cannot help build a workable life around that choice, Jenny may eventually stop believing that staying is responsible. For Jenny, this realization hurts because she never imagined the breaking point would look so ordinary. She expected that if she ever reached the end, it would come after some enormous betrayal or unforgettable argument. Yet instead, she finds herself exhausted by a collection of smaller uncertainties that have slowly become heavier than one dramatic event. She can handle one difficult month, but she does not know how many difficult years she should accept. She can understand Sumit missing his family, but she cannot understand why that means their marriage must once again become unstable. She can sympathize with financial pressure, but she cannot make money appear by sacrificing more of her own time. Eventually, all of those problems point toward the same uncomfortable truth. Loving Sumit does not automatically mean she must accept every consequence of his indecision. Sumit senses her pulling away and begins offering the reassurance he has always used during difficult moments, telling Jenny that they have survived too much to let this situation destroy them. Normally, that argument would reach her, because their history has always been proof that they can endure difficult things. But this time, Jenny turns the same history around on him. She tells him that surviving difficult things is not supposed to become the permanent structure of a marriage. At some point, the years they spent fighting are supposed to produce something safer than another fight, and she cannot keep treating survival itself as evidence that everything is working. That comment hits Sumit hard, because he has always viewed their ability to endure as one of the strongest parts of their relationship, while Jenny is beginning to wonder whether endurance has quietly become the excuse that keeps them from demanding change. There is another painful contradiction underneath all of this, because Sumit believes Jenny's willingness to leave means she is giving up at the exact moment he needs understanding most. Jenny believes the opposite. She feels that she has spent years proving how much she was willing to endure, and remaining indefinitely would not prove more love. It would only prove she still has no limit. That is why she refuses to frame America as revenge. She tells Sumit that if she goes, she will go because she needs stability and control over her own future, not because she wants to hurt him or force him to chase her. Sumit realizes that he cannot dismiss this as another argument designed to scare him, because Jenny is talking about life after him with a calmness he has never heard before. At that point, Sumit admits something he has avoided saying directly. The possibility of Jenny actually leaving frightens him more than he expected. He always knew she had options, but because she had remained beside him through so many difficult years, part of him began treating her presence as the one stable thing inside an unstable life. Even when his family relationships changed, even when money became stressful, even when plans were delayed, Jenny was still there. Now that certainty is disappearing at exactly the same moment, he feels everything else becoming uncertain, and the emotional balance of the relationship suddenly reverses. For years, Jenny was the person wondering when Sumit would finally create the future he promised. Now Sumit is the person wondering whether Jenny will still be there long enough for him to do it. That reversal becomes impossible to ignore during their next conversation, because Sumit asks Jenny for more time, and instead of immediately agreeing, she asks the question he does not want to answer: how much? Sumit says he cannot give an exact number because repairing his family relationship and improving the financial situation will not happen according to a simple schedule. But Jenny explains that this is precisely why she cannot keep accepting the request. More time sounds reasonable when there is a clear goal at the end of it, but if Sumit cannot say what has to change, how they will know it has changed, or what he will do if the family still refuses to accept their marriage, then Jenny is being asked to wait for a finish line nobody can even see. Sumit becomes frustrated and says that Jenny is demanding certainty from a situation where certainty does not exist, and she agrees with him more quickly than he expects. She tells him she does not need certainty about everything. She needs certainty about him. She does not need him to guarantee that the debt disappears quickly. She does not need him to guarantee that his family changes their feelings. And she does not need him to guarantee that every future plan works perfectly. What she needs is to know that when those problems become difficult, his first response will not be to place their marriage back into negotiation. Jenny can tolerate uncertainty around them, but she no longer wants to tolerate uncertainty between them. And Sumit finally understands why every practical explanation he has offered has failed to calm her. The confrontation reaches its most painful point when Jenny tells Sumit that she will not move back into his family home under any circumstances. She respects that he may believe returning could help repair important relationships, but she knows what that environment represents for her, and she refuses to recreate a situation where she constantly feels that her marriage needs approval from people outside it. If Sumit decides he has to return, she will not physically stop him, but she also will not remain in India, pretending that nothing significant has changed. Sumit asks whether she is saying she will leave immediately if he spends one night at home, and Jenny tells him not to reduce the issue to one night, because they both know the real question is what that night represents. Sumit tries again to explain that he feels trapped. And this time, Jenny does not dismiss his feelings. She tells him she believes he genuinely feels pulled apart. She understands that losing family support hurts, and she knows that financial pressure can make every decision feel desperate. Then she points out the contradiction that has been sitting between them the entire time. Every time Sumit says he has no choice, somebody else seems to be making the choice for him. His family sets the condition, debt creates the urgency, circumstances decide the timing, and Jenny is expected to understand the outcome. What she wants is not for Sumit to control every problem. She wants him to stop describing himself as powerless inside decisions that directly shape both of their lives. That comment finally changes the way Sumit looks at the ultimatum, because until now, he has been treating himself as the person caught in the middle of two sides. Jenny forces him to see that remaining in the middle is also an active position with consequences. Every day he avoids choosing a direction, Jenny becomes less confident in their future. His financial problems remain unresolved, and the family ultimatum becomes more powerful because uncertainty itself keeps pushing him toward the easiest short-term solution. He realizes that doing nothing does not protect him from making the wrong decision. It simply allows pressure to make the decision gradually, and that may be exactly what Jenny has been afraid of from the beginning. Then, the ultimatum quietly flips, because what began as Sumit's family telling him, "Come back to us or continue without our support," has now created another choice choice he never expected to face. Jenny is effectively telling him that she cannot continue building a future around promises without action. So if he chooses the temporary security of going back without creating a clear, independent plan, she may choose the security of returning to America without him. Neither person says, choose me or lose me, because the situation is more complicated than that. But emotionally, the meaning is impossible to miss. Sumit wanted more time to avoid choosing between two painful options, yet time itself has now created a third possibility where Jenny makes the decision before he does. What makes this moment even more important is that Jenny does not demand instant perfection from him, because if she suddenly insisted that every loan disappear, every family conflict end, and every future plan becomes certain before tomorrow morning, Sumit could reasonably say the expectation was impossible. Instead, she asks for something much harder: to fake visible movement. She wants a financial plan that exists outside vague reassurance. She wants to know where they are going to live if Sumit remains independent. She wants boundaries around how much his family's approval can affect their marriage. And she wants to understand whether America is a future they are genuinely considering together, or simply an idea they mention whenever life in India becomes difficult. Jenny is not asking him to solve everything. She is asking him to prove that their life is being built intentionally. Sumit initially reacts as though Jenny has handed him another ultimatum, but after sitting with it, he begins to recognize the difference. His family's condition asks him to return in exchange for support, while Jenny is telling him what she personally can and cannot continue accepting. She is not preventing him from seeing his family. She is not telling him to stop loving them, and she is not claiming he can never repair those relationships. She is saying that she will no longer build her life around a marriage that becomes unstable every time those relationships become difficult. That distinction matters because Sumit has spent so much time focusing on what everybody wants from him that he has barely stopped to ask what kind of husband he wants to be when nobody makes the decision easy. For the first time, Sumit begins talking less about what his family expects and more about what staying with Jenny would actually require from him. He acknowledges that the debt cannot simply remain something they discuss whenever it causes a crisis, because if money is powerful enough to influence where he lives, then it needs to become part of a real plan rather than a hidden pressure they keep avoiding. He admits that returning home might give him immediate comfort, but immediate comfort could create a much larger cost if Jenny loses trust in him completely. He also recognizes that repairing his relationship with his family does not have to mean physically surrendering the independence he and Jenny have been trying to build, although figuring out what that balance looks like will be much harder than saying it. Jenny listens carefully, but she does not immediately soften, because this is exactly the stage where she has heard hopeful words before. She tells Sumit that she wants to believe him, but belief without evidence is what brought her to this breaking point. If he chooses to stay, she does not want him resenting her every time financial pressure becomes difficult. If he chooses to repair his family relationships, she does not want those conversations secretly becoming negotiations about whether the marriage should continue. And if they ever seriously consider America, she does not want that plan treated like a rescue boat that only appears when everything else is sinking. She wants them to make choices before circumstances make those choices for them. Because after 8 years, she is tired of living one emergency at a time. Sumit then asks Jenny the question he has been afraid to ask directly. If he goes home temporarily, will she really leave India? Jenny pauses because she understands that whatever answer she gives will change the way he hears everything else, but she refuses to promise that she will stay. She tells him that if he chooses to move back without a clear plan for what happens next, she has to begin preparing for the possibility that their lives are heading in different directions. She does not say she will book a flight that evening, and she does not claim the marriage would automatically be over, but she makes it clear that he can no longer assume she will remain indefinitely while he figures out whether he can build a life separate from family pressure. That uncertainty finally puts Sumit in the position Jenny has occupied for years, because now he is the person waiting to see whether the partner he loves will remain. The emotional reversal is almost cruel in its simplicity. Jenny spent years wondering whether Sumit would eventually choose a stable life with her, while Sumit could usually count on the fact that she was still there asking the question. Now he looks at Jenny and realizes she is no longer asking him to reassure her that he loves her. She is evaluating whether love is enough reason to keep waiting. For the first time, Sumit has to imagine waking up after Jenny has made a decision without him, and that possibility makes his family's offer of security feel far less secure than it did at the beginning. Still, nothing suddenly becomes becomes neat, because there is no believable version of this situation where one emotional conversation fixes years of pressure. The loans remain, the family conflict remains, Jenny's doubts remain, and Sumit's desire to repair the relationship with his family does not disappear simply because he is afraid of losing his wife. What changes is that Sumit can no longer pretend he is choosing between a painful option and an easy option. Going home may offer immediate support, but it could cost him Jenny's trust. Staying with Jenny may protect the marriage, but it forces him to confront the financial and emotional problems without hiding behind the possibility that somebody else will rescue him. Every road now has a price, and avoiding the road has become expensive too. Jenny eventually tells Sumit she is willing to give the situation one final chance to move in a different direction, but she carefully avoids promising unlimited time. She does not want another deadline designed purely for drama, because the point is not whether Sumit can make everything look better for a few days. She wants consistency. She wants to see whether he can create boundaries with his family without turning those boundaries into permanent estrangement, whether he can address the debt without using family dependence as the default solution, and whether he can speak about their future with actual decision instead of comforting possibilities. If those things begin changing, Jenny is willing to keep building with him. But if the same cycle immediately returns, she knows she has to consider a life that does not depend on waiting for Sumit to become ready. Sumit accepts that he cannot ask Jenny to absorb every consequence while he remains undecided, and even though he still does not have a perfect answer. He finally stops presenting the lack of a perfect answer as a reason to delay every difficult choice. He tells Jenny that he does not want to lose his family, but he also admits that going back simply because pressure has become uncomfortable would send a message about their marriage that he cannot easily undo. He needs to find a way to repair those relationships without allowing them to dictate where his marriage stands, and he needs to face the financial situation directly enough that money stops turning emotional pressure into practical necessity. Whether he can actually do that remains the real test, because saying it during a frightening conversation is easier than living it when the next bill or family call arrives. Jenny does not celebrate, because she has learned that temporary relief can feel dangerously similar to progress. Instead, she tells Sumit that she will watch what happens next, not in a suspicious or controlling way, but because actions are the only thing capable of answering the question that has been hanging over them from the beginning. When pressure returns, and it almost certainly will, does Sumit protect the independent life they are trying to build, or does he once again treat the marriage as the flexible part of the equation? That is the question Jenny can no longer answer for him, and it is also the question Sumit can no longer avoid by asking for patience. The most painful part of this situation is that there is no obvious villain standing in the middle of it. Sumit's family can believe they are protecting their own values and still create pressure that damages his marriage. Sumit can genuinely love Jenny and still make decisions that leave her feeling secondary. Jenny can deeply love Sumit and still decide that love no longer justifies indefinite uncertainty. Financial pressure can influence all of them without anybody deliberately trying to destroy the relationship. That is what makes the conflict feel so uncomfortable. Because everybody can explain why they feel the way they do, but explanations do not erase consequences, and somebody eventually has to decide which consequences they are willing to live with. And that brings everything back to the question Sumit never wanted to answer, except now the question is much bigger than choosing his family or choosing Jenny. He has to decide whether he is finally ready to build a life where his marriage can survive even when his family disagrees, where financial problems are handled through planning instead of panic, and where Jenny is no longer asked to prove her commitment by wading through another undefined period of uncertainty. Jenny, meanwhile, has to decide whether the changes she sees are enough to justify one final chance, or whether 8 years of patience have already answered that question for her. Neither decision comes with a guarantee, but for the first time, both of them understand that refusing to decide is no longer protecting the relationship. Because, after 8 years, the real heartbreak is not that Sumit's family might reject Jenny again. Jenny already knows what rejection feels like, and she has survived it before. The real heartbreak is realizing that after all those years, their rejection may still have enough influence to determine what Sumit does when life becomes difficult. And that is the part Jenny can no longer ignore. If Sumit can prove through action that their marriage is capable of standing independently, this crisis could become the moment they finally stop repeating the same cycle. But if the pressure returns and Sumit retreats again, Jenny may no longer be standing there waiting for another promise, because this time she has already imagined the plane, the separation, and the possibility of rebuilding a life without him. So the final decision remains deliberately unresolved, because Sumit does not magically erase his debts. Jenny does not suddenly forget 8 years of uncertainty, and his family does not transform overnight into enthusiastic supporters of every choice he makes. Instead, Jenny gives the situation one final opportunity to become something different, while Sumit is left with a challenge much harder than making one dramatic declaration of love. He has to prove, consistently and practically, that choosing Jenny is not something he only does when the choice is easy. Whether he can actually do that becomes the question hanging over everything that follows. Because now, Jenny has made her own position clear, and Sumit knows that another period of endless waiting may end with him becoming the person who gets left behind. After everything Jenny has invested, would you give Sumit one final chance to prove that things can genuinely change? Or would you say 8 years of waiting is already more than enough? This entire script is a fictional dramatized storyline created for commentary and entertainment, and does not claim that these private events actually happened.